So, Jason,
Tim.
you and I both frequently find ourselves talking to the PKI people at large enterprises about changes that are coming in the industry. And one of the things that certainly I've observed is we've had conversations about a type of certificate called X9. And there's been questions, I think, and oftentimes poor understanding of exactly what the certificate is and does. And so we thought it might be helpful for the community if we just really explained exactly what an X9 certificate is.
Tim, that's a great idea. Hey, can I just add something off the top?
Yes.
It's just what I'm witnessing, and then you can just take off from there. You know, the deprecation of multi-use EKU certificates,
Right.
The fact that we're going to be living in the world where SSL server certificates, if you will, you go by so many different names, that's going to be really the only public trust use case there is that's left. That's driving people who use publicly trusted certificates for other use cases, such as authentication, to other things. Yeah. And this is one of those other things, Tim, and that's why it's so popular. But you've got an agenda here, and I'd love.
It's the only option there, and that's a valid point too. And I'm glad you brought that up. We should probably return to that, which is okay. Well, what are my choices, right? And I think we should hit that while we're at it, right? So, and let me just grab what you said there a little bit. Yeah, out there, I think you're seeing a lot of people saying, okay, this is my substitute for public TLS in a world of deprecated client authentication EKUs. To be clear, the X9 certificate initiative predates Google's announcement of the deprecation of the client auth EKU. So that's an important point to understand. I talked to people who think that this was a response to that. It was not a response to that. It was well underway prior to any public announcement from Google. So that's probably, just since you brought it up, one of the things. And the order of events matters. So it's good to understand that order of events. All right. So first of all, let's just back up. What is X9 at all? What does this mean? X9 is a voluntary US-based financial industry standards consortium. So financial organizations need to be able to interoperate, right? They need to be able to move money back and forth and do so in a reliable, robust, secure way. And the X9 consortium, which has been around for a long time, creates standards that banks use to interoperate with each other. And this particular group took on an initiative. They created a working group within X9 to create a consortium level certificate. And what we mean by a consortium level certificate is this is a certificate that a group of members in the consortium come up with a set of rules that they agree that they're going to follow. And then some kind of private certificate type is created around that. And we see this with lots of consortia. And, these things you see these in smart cities and IoT devices and clean energy and aeronautics.
They're all over the place.
Wi-Fi, right? So there's lots of consortia. This is another consortium, right? That's really what it is. And in 2025, X9 announced that they were going to have this new consortium certificate that they called an X9 certificate. So that's when that came out. And again, as I said, it came out in advance of Google's announcement about the deprecation of MTLS. But what happened is when the deprecation of MTLS was announced, we saw a pivot in the dialogue and the public perception around X9, and people began to view that as their next step in a post-client auth TLS world, if that makes sense.
That's why I brought it up at the top, because that's the I think in terms of our audience's mind share, that's how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, that seems to be how most people are thinking about it from what I can see, anecdotally. So what is an X9 certificate? Let's talk about that. It is a server certificate. It is loosely and generally based on the OV certificate from the CA Browser Forum BRs, with the freedom to deviate from those BRs any way that the X9 consortium sees fit, because it is a consortium certificate. It is on a private route, and it has to be on a private route. It's a consortium certificate. They always are. And there's no technical way for that not to be on a private route. That's not even an addressable thing. You can't configure it. There won't be a new version that isn't on the private route in the future. That's just built in architecturally to this basic decision. And it is similar to a TLS cert in a lot of ways, but there are certainly ways that it's not. For instance, the step down in maximum certificate term that is underway right now, X9 isn't going to do that. So they're going to keep themselves at 1-year certificates. The mandatory revocation of misissued certificates, which is deemed to be necessary to maintain the overall security of the web PKI, X9 isn't going to do that. If there are misissued certificates, they just get to live out their lifespan until they're done. And of course, the deprecation of MTLS, right? The removal of the client authentication EKU as a possibility. X9 is not going to do that. So those are ways that it's, I think, materially different. And there can be others. X9 can do whatever they want. They can deviate any way they want. Those are the deviations that I know of that we have seen so far. And then the last important thing to understand about what it is there is one CA. So there is not the variety of choices that you get in the web PKI as a public certificate. And this is another thing, I think, where there's broad misconceptions about how this is, right? It is one consortium certificate, there is one CA. You get to get your certificate from that CA on that route, and that's what you get. Those are all your choices, right? So that's what it is. Now, let's talk about what it is not, which is probably more important, because again, I think in the absence of knowledge, people are imagining it's all kinds of things. And so let's clarify some of the things that it is not. So first of all, it is not the client auth enabled substitute for TLS, right? As I said, that isn't what it is, right? And again, there's this popular perception that, whoever they are removing MTLS from public certs, and they're bringing them over and they're putting them in X9 instead. That is not happening. There is no they who are doing that, and it is not the client auth substitute for MTLS. And that's because it's not endorsed or overseen by CA Browser Forum in any way. It's entirely outside of CA Browser Forum's scope. It is a private route.
Private consortia.
CA Browser Forum doesn't do private route products, right? And it's also, likewise, it is not endorsed or overseen by CCADB for the exact same reason, and it is not endorsed or overseen by any major browser root store or any major root store for the exact same reason, because private routes just are out of scope for all of that stuff. The sense is that if you are customizing your root store, then you are the one who has to decide whether or not you trust these routes. And bodies like CAB Forum, CCADB, and browser root programs just aren't going to be part of that dialogue, right? So that's an important thing to understand. It's not any kind of official standard. It's not from any kind of regulatory agency. From what I can tell, it is not required by any regulation at all. So that's another thing that I think people aren't really clear on, right? There is no standard forcing this. This is just a thing that individual IT departments can elect to use if they so choose. It is not, therefore, generally interoperable. Because it's based on a private root that won't be present on a client system that hasn't explicitly installed this private root, it is not generally interoperable. So you can't take these certs and just throw them on servers and know it's going to work, right? You would have to have a high degree of confidence that whoever's connecting into you, you'd have to have 100% confidence if you want uptime, that whoever's connecting into you has gone through the custom root installation process on that end, right? And again, this is the big misconception we run into a lot. Well, this is a new thing from Cab Forum. It means I just put them on my servers and it writes. Or no. You got to be in an environment where you know that you're going to have an X9 on the other side, right? Or an X9 root on the other side. Extremely important to understand, and it's a misperception that we get a lot. And therefore, it's not actually any more out of the box ready than any private PKI, right? So if I stood up my own CA and I put my own private PKI certs on it, that would be the same level of out of the box readiness as if I went and got X9 certificates and put those on, right? They're identical in that regard. And therefore, and I'm also going to say, here's the last thing I'm going to say, it's not equally secure to your private PKI. And the reason for that is because you don't really have any control. So in the case of a private PKI, I know who gets every one of my certs. So if I'm trying to authenticate a client, I know I have criteria that client must have to get that certificate because I'm the one who doles them out. And so the authentication value there is real, right? There's a certain number of servers that I have, and I know that the servers in my farm have this cert because I'm the one who issued them. Once you get to this consortium cert, and this is a risk with any consortium cert, but in this case, it's particularly broad. Like literally anyone can go buy these certs. All you really need is a credit card. And so a consequence of that is that you don't actually, there's no authentication value in terms of who's on the other side, right? Because all I know is they have a credit card. As opposed to if I had a private PKI, when I would control how they would be doled out. So I would actually know who has these certs, who I've decided to give them to, and I would know that when someone's connecting to me and it's authenticating, that they are in the community of servers that I've chosen to trust. Does that make sense?
Tim, I know you've got a little more to talk about, but yeah. I want to go right back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast about this is absolutely not, X9 is absolutely not a general solution to the deprecation of EKU certificates.
Yeah, and that's the big misconception. Like if you walk away from this with one thing, understand, because I've bumped into this multiple times, which is why I said to you, hey, let's do this episode, which is people have gotten this idea that, okay, this is my MTLS enabled equivalent of TLS that's being given to me by the same people who give me TLS. And that one fundamental assumption in your brain leads to a whole bunch of wrong conclusions. And so we want to make sure that people really understand what this product is and what it can do and what it can't do.
Sometimes, Tim, we're talking on this podcast about technology, and it's like probably at the 99th percentile of what we talk about.
Right.
Sometimes it's about psychology. And this is a psychology episode.
Yeah, I think it is. And just to pick up what you threw down there for just a minute, and I do have some more facts to share, but before we get to that, I think what you're seeing with that is you're seeing a strong appetite for a new product that can replace my public TLS certs for this particular use case, right? And so, people can get a misapprehension. I think they're more likely to get a misapprehension if they really want it to be true. And so in this case, they want to know, what is my next step? What do I do? And so they're grabbing this as a belief of the next step. I think the next step is private CA, right?
It is, Tim.
And so that's, we're watching a lot of people who are eager to understand what that next step is how I interpret that from a psychology perspective. So who is requiring it, right? And so as far as I know, there is no regulation anywhere in the world that requires that you use an X9 cert. I do not believe that there's any standard or governing body. We do hear anecdotally that it's possible that some major banks might be requiring an X9 cert in order to connect to them. And that could be simply enforced by policy, or that could be enforced actually technically on their end, right?
Which is what a true consortia would be doing.
Right.
FI to FI authentication is a perfect reason for a consortia-based private CA.
Yeah, and I can't vouch for that from personal experience. That's just what I've heard, right? Yeah. But it seems credible, and it's probably true that that's going on. So in that scenario, you might have a bank you're doing business with who has decided they're going to require that you get an X9 cert, in which case you're going to have to go get one, right? Now, there again, that bank doesn't need to require that. And that bank might change their policy and things along those lines. So you need to keep an eye on that too, right? And you could even maybe ask them, do you really need this? Right. But that's, that's another, that is one scenario. And you want to keep an eye on that, because that isn't based on a law or a hard regulation or a regulatory body or anything like that. Those banks do have the liberty to change those requirements at any time. So even if you're doing that now, because you think it's making you compliant with the bank's requirements now, be cognizant of the fact that that might change in the future, and you might have to adjust. And then, again, if you're in a scenario where you feel like some type of MTLS is required, people may be deciding to do that with X9. That technically is an option. It's also a technical option just to do it with private CA, right? And so that's where we are as of today. And I hope this was, clear and concise in terms of explaining what this certificate type is, and more importantly, what it is not.
Tim, I'm going to unload a few couple things here at the end of this podcast.
Go ahead.
There is no such thing as a general purpose consortia PKI.
Right. There can't be. By definition of how PKI and how trust models work, there can't be.
SSL, the deprecated term for web PKI that we all know and love, is not, even in itself, as a publicly trusted thing,
right,
is not a universal generalized PKI.
Right. It's
okay?
the closest we have.
It's, however, one of the things that made it the closest is being taken away. Mm-hmm. Authentication, client authentication is being taken away, and that's a good thing. I agree with what Google is doing. Using publicly trusted certificates for client authentication is utterly inappropriate. Always was and always will be, and I'm glad that it's going away.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about the consequences of that. Consequences is you got to go figure out a different way to get your certs.
Yeah.
Why were people using certs, publicly trusted certs, inappropriately in the first place? It's because it was just easy to go get. But it was bad in operational practice. It caused fragility in the system.
Yeah.
And Google's addressing that. And so trying to cozy up to what might be perceived very inappropriately as a general purpose, hey, I can get, quick and easy dirty certs over here, and it's a way to just continue the really bad practices I was doing before, unbeknownst to me, is a terrible thing. And that's why we're talking about on this podcast. This is not to blast X9. X9, Hey, there's tons of consortia PKI that are out there. It's just none of them are pretending to be general purpose.
Yeah.
I don't even think X9's pretending. It's just that there's a perception.
The consortium is pretending, but I think that is this misunderstanding that's starting to creep out there.
Right. And that's what we're addressing.
Yeah.
Don't think of X9 as a general purpose. Go get my search. Tim said it best. Who are you trusting? You're trusting people who simply have a credit card. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. Yeah. So that's, And I don't know that everybody gets that, which is why I really wanted to talk about it today, right? Is because I'm not sure that your average IT administrator who says, oh, I need a solution because as of March, this is going to stop working. I don't know that they really understand that point.
Tim, I think out of this podcast, you and I probably need to talk about modern private CAs for the purposes that people might be looking at X9 going, hey, why don't I just use X9? There's lots of reasons you probably shouldn't. There's a lot. If you're dealing with an FI who is using it as a proper consortia private PKI, great. That's a perfect use case for X9. Have at it. And I'm glad that the FIs came up with something. But for everybody else, there's better ideas for you out there, guys. And maybe it's just lack of knowledge.
Yeah, and I think I feel like there's probably more to be said here. I think maybe we'll return to this topic, Jay, and offer some alternatives and things along those lines.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jason. This has been Rick Cousins.